That's a very open and transparent view of how you're going to make it come through. If I could ask the panel to come up and join us now, we're starting a panel session, just to cover some of the questions that I'm sure are coming through on the issues and the successes that you've had. I'll go out of the way down this end. I know David's a bit tight for time, so I'm going to go to him first, actually, and just say, having sat through the conference and watched how the national shipbuilding strategy is coming through, are there any lessons that you or Ferguson Marine would like to inject into the strategy?
This one live? Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think if NSO had been around in 2008 to 2012, when Ferguson didn't have any shipbuilding to do, that would have helped keep a strategic resource going more healthily than going through the peaks and troughs we've been through. I'm really hoping that we can get some significant pressure to secure the small ferry program, because that will rescue Ferguson.
Thank you. The next one's from the panel on the computer. How does ABP deal with the chicken and egg choices in future fuels, and how does it plan to invest?
So the easy or the short answer to that is we'll be clearly led by our customers. There are some options which are lower risk than others. So a greater degree of electrification is one of the lower risk options, because there are a number of different modalities that could service, from propulsion to battery, etc. We are also looking at opportunities to gain synergies from some of our projects that look at alternative fuels as a commodity, and then their provision as a sort of a maritime fuel. A classic example of which would obviously be around the hydrogen project that we're working on in Immingham. But after that, that is then we are into quite a bit of uncertainty about where we're going and the sort of commercial models that we will need to operate in order to put that infrastructure in place.
Thank you. The next one's coming to you, Al. Have you got any advice for SMEs on approaching and working with BP?
That's a really good question. So there are a few different routes. If you're interested in the subsea bit, I've just come to me, because that'll just short circuit everything. But there are kind of PSCM programs, which is the BP speak for supply chain, and they have supplier forums, and there's also a ventures piece, and where they try and invest in in small companies. So there's a range of different options. But if it's particularly around this bit, I would just come straight to me, and I'll figure out how to hook you up to the right bit of BP. That will save you months.
That sounds a very straightforward answer. Declan, you're in the lucky position of owning your own ports as well as the vessels. How easy has it been? How easy has that made it to plan the decarbonisation programme? And what decisions are you making for bunkering for alternative fuels?
Well, we do own 26 ports, but we don't own all the ports that we operate to, and we have seen challenges with that in terms of shore charging facilities, for example. We need to then go and carry out the feasibility studies, see if we can get the shore infrastructure there, and offer to manage that on behalf of the council as well. So we have had a bit of issues there, and in particular with the LNG side of things, what we have seen is there's not one of our ports, but there is going to be a lot of safety zones, and temporary, I might add, and then also some permanent, that the operator of the port will have to work around. And we've had to have a good bit of collaboration with them just to help them understand the restrictions that the port will bring in. So it's not been as straightforward as we'd hoped it had been, but for the ports that are ours, obviously it's much easier in terms of getting shore power, etc. there. In terms of alternate fuels, for the ports that we own, absolutely we'll be making arrangements for each route individually, but at the moment it's still not quite clear for the major vessels in particular which way we're going to go with the alternate fuel. We've spoke about methanol potentially. We do have LNG at the moment, more of a transitional fuel, and we'll look at it when it comes down to the next set of concept designs on which alternate fuel we will aim to take forward. But we do have a lot of experience now from LNG, and a lot of the work that's been done there is what we believe to be quite similar for the alternate fuels.
And would you like to add to that on the first 3 hybrid vessels in operation? And what's the lessons have you learned from that?
That we don't always get shore supply. That's something we've taken forward with the SVRP project with the generator. It is quite an intermittent grid, especially in the places that we operate, quite islands in particular, but also remote places. So we've had to take that forward into the SVRP. The vessels themselves have actually done very well. I actually did my dissertation on the hybrid vessels, and we were aiming to save approximately 20% for those routes, but from what I found over the course of the year, we're saving up to 33% sometimes over the course of one full year. So I think they have done very well so far.
Thank you. And the next one's coming back to you, David. It's from Adrian Went, and it's concerning Ferguson's difficult history colours the opinion of the sector and the banking industry. Is there anything you can advise on how we deal with the banking industry, and how would we go forward with that?
I'm not sure in the right place to comment about banking, giving our shareholders and my client is both the Scottish ministers. I think Ken made a good point yesterday that actually a yard needs to have both a product strategy and a financing strategy. And I think where we go forward with Ferguson in the future, we'll see what type of ships we're trying to build and how we finance them.
That was remarkably restrained. Well done.
Yes,
Okay. And there's another question for you, actually, conscious you might have to go. In the shipbuilding sector, how important is it, you say, for early engagement with the customer, and how do you go about that?
Well, I think the 2 ferries that we've just been talking about are classic examples of getting it wrong from the start. Placing the contract, not understanding the competencies at the time in the yard when the contract was placed, how you accelerate that program, get into the build strategy. I think that relationship up front is really important, and plenty of planning ahead before you cut steel.
Yeah.
We're an example of doing it wrong.
And going to the floor, is there anything on the floor I can take, please? No, well, I think we've probably covered most of the questions that need to be asked. Any final questions before we move on? No, well, I think that was a very, very useful background, different perspective from this morning, but same sort of themes beginning to emerge. Could I just say thank you very much to the panel and to the presenters? Thank you.